Alrighty, welcome back to Shut Up and Ball. I am Aaron Chow, accompanied by Mr. John Harris. As always, we're back to talk Week 15 picks in regards to the NFL season, and I'll update the standings in a second. Obviously, before I do so, and before we get into our picks, please feel free to like, comment, subscribe if you're watching on YouTube. So we are inching closer to 1,000 subs, and I say it every time. But like I said, we are getting closer and closer. And then also we are on podcast mediums as well. And then our socials at Chop and Ball Pod on Insta, and then at Chop and Ball on Twitter and TikTok. But anyhow, in case you missed last episode, or I forget I'm not sure if I specified exactly what occurred in Week 14, but John, I had a lot of differences. John went 6-7. I went 11-2. So John went from having a 1-game lead, now is 4 games behind going into this week. So still very much in the hunt, and especially now there's no more bye weeks. So we'll be picking a full 16 games, at least until the playoffs. So back to no more bye weeks, like I just mentioned. Going to start with Thursday Night Football, though. We still got that, unfortunately. And this Thursday, we have the San Francisco 49ers. They are favored by 3.5 going to Seattle. Seattle just got off that tough loss against the Panthers. Niners off that big win over the Bucs last week. So 2 different momentums going into this one on a short week. John, do you think Seattle can turn it around, or do you think San Francisco keeps rolling?
This game's interesting because both teams have some key players that are questionable or dealing with injuries recently. Kenneth Walker, at least as of right now, has no injury designation, so he could be playing, but he could look a little rusty coming off that injury, and it's a short week, all that kind of stuff. For San Francisco, Brock Purdy, questionable to play. I'm assuming he's playing, but still questionable. So they could potentially go on to their 4th quarterback. But regardless, I think I'm going to take San Francisco. I do think that Seattle's going to want to have a bounce back week after not getting embarrassed, but losing last week at home in a pretty crucial game. But I'm just not sure that San Francisco is the team that they're going to be able to do it against, because despite the quarterback play, whether it's Brock Purdy or whoever else, I think it's Josh Johnson, I think is who they signed off somebody's practice squad.
Yeah, he's their backup.
Yeah, so he's the backup. So if he plays, I still think that McCaffrey, Ayuk, Kittle, that defense, they're all going to be good enough to beat Seattle here. So I'm going to take San Francisco. I think it's also key that San Francisco has gotten their run game going recently, and we just saw last week Carolina was able to gash them on the ground. So I think this could be a big McCaffrey week, and I think that's going to be enough to overcome Geno Smith in that offense. So I'm taking the 49ers, even though they're on the road in Seattle.
Could also be a big Jordan Mason week. He's been really effective for them, and especially with the absence of Debo. Like I mentioned last pod, could see just more CMC in a wide receiver role. But regardless, I'm also going San Francisco. You hit all the main points I wanted to. Only one I also want to focus on is Seattle. Their defense, I would mention last pod too, like kind of middle of the pack we've seen. If you can kind of have some balance, if you're not just one dimensional, it's hard for them to get stops consistently. They're really turnover dependent that way also. And San Francisco, like we just mentioned, very run heavy. Kyle Shanahan knows, kind of drills in his quarterbacks to be safe with the ball, especially, I think you mentioned too, have a great defense. So it's kind of already been their mindset. So yeah, I'm going with San Francisco as well. Just an unfortunate kind of run here for Seattle. They do get Kenneth Walker back, but I just don't think their run game is amazing enough to force issues for San Francisco's defense. So I'm going San Fran also. So we are in agreement for the Thursday night game. So now we head to a couple of Saturday games. We have 3 Saturday games this week, starting with Minnesota at home. They are favored by 4.5, hosting the Indianapolis Colts. Who do you going with here for this one, John?
I'm going to go with Minnesota here. I know that they're a team that has had a lot of controversy around them in terms of their legitimacy, but overall, I think they do have the keys to beat Indianapolis, and I don't think that Indianapolis stylistically is going to be able to expose Minnesota. We've seen that the way to beat Minnesota has been through the air. We just saw Jared Goff and Amon St. Brown and all those guys over there do that just last week. I'm just not sure that Indianapolis, with as much as Michael Pittman and Alec Pierce are super talented, I'm not sure that Matt Ryan and that wide receiver group are going to be able to take that much advantage of it. And plus, Indianapolis's defense has just been very weakened this year, so Dalvin Cook could have a big week. I don't think anybody on that defense is going to be able to slow down Justin Jefferson. So I'm going to take Minnesota here. They're also at home. I think that they're just going to want to finish the year strong here, so I'm going to take the Vikings.
Yeah, I'm also expecting the Vikings to bounce back. Mainly of the reasons you mentioned. Also want to add, Indy, I know that they had a little bit of resurgence. The offensive line's been better, but it's still, we have to remember it's not a great offensive line. And Minnesota, yes, they're weak. Their defense is their main weakness in terms of their three phases. But they still have a pretty good pass rush, and Zadarius Smith and Danielle Hunter. And especially if they're, like you mentioned, their defense can't hold the fort for long, like we've seen. If the offense has to start dropping back and throwing the ball, it's just bad things. Obviously bad things have happened. The Dallas game especially, and we've seen that's when the turnovers start happening, because then Matt Ryan's getting hit, or he has to force the ball in certain places because he's been getting hit and make a play, and just bad things have happened. So I'm in agreement. I'm going with Minnesota as well. We are both expecting them to right the ship, because they have obviously big loss against the Lions last week, so they need to stay atop the NFC. Who knows if they'll even get home field, but just to get home field in the first round. But anyhow, we go to a divisional matchup in the AFC North next. It is the Cleveland Browns at home, favored by 3.5 against the Baltimore Ravens. I'll have to check the injury report. Could be Tyler Huntley for Baltimore. I will be checking that in a second. But obviously, Watson will still be playing for the Browns. What are your thoughts on this? And let me know if you need the status of Huntley. It's questionable, by the way.
To me, it doesn't really matter which quarterback plays, because Baltimore stylistically is going to be the same. And I'm going with Cleveland. I just think that Cleveland, although they didn't look super great last week, I do think that the pieces are falling into place. Deshaun Watson had a better game compared to the first week, and I think that he's just going to continue to steadily improve. And I expect the run game to be better this week compared to last week. It was almost non-existent, so I think that's going to change. I don't know. Just overall, also they're going to be at home, and Amari Cooper, typically performs better at home, so I'm going to rock with Cleveland here. I just feel like with Baltimore, once again, as I've said many times, the scoring potential feels really limited. And I know that Cleveland can be like that too, at least the last 2 weeks with Deshaun Watson back. But they've already talked about ramping up the amount of deep balls that he's going to be throwing. So I don't know. I think we could see a little bit more explosiveness, at least out of Cleveland's offense, which just gives me a little bit more hope in that regard. So I'm taking the Browns.
All right. Well, I am actually going with Baltimore, so that's our first disagreement for the week. Even though they were struggling at quarterback last week with Huntley being out, and they had to go with, I think it was Anthony Brown. I'm sorry, I forget that
Anthony Brown.
Yep. Anthony Brown. Okay. The run game was still doing really well, although J.K. Dobbins, hopefully, he's fully healthy. But even then, Gus Edwards was still solid last week. And like I mentioned before, you can run on Cleveland. Cleveland can be run on very easily. And I think, too, although I do agree Deshaun Watson getting better and better in his return, it's just still tough. Your third game back, you're going to be playing against Baltimore. Baltimore does a lot of crazy things, and their secondary has been better in recent weeks. Remember, that was a huge thing at the beginning of the year. They're missing, blowing a lot of leads and just really getting the score run up on them a lot of those games, Miami, for instance, and such. But they seem to have kind of tightened that up on the back end. It seems like the addition of Roquan's been very helpful. So, I just think Baltimore's be a little bit too much for Cleveland. It's a typical Baltimore thing where they've had some critical injuries, but they're still managing to weather the storm. Their offensive line has been healthier, with Ronnie Stanley been playing a little more. So I think that's obviously been a big boost for them. And like I just mentioned, J.K. Dobbins too, he seems to be a difference maker. So I'm going Baltimore John going Cleveland. So that is one difference for us on the board. Now we go to a divisional matchup in the AFC East. Last time we saw these two teams clash, very exciting matchup, as here they are again. This time it's at Buffalo, where the Bills, they are favored by 7.5, hosting the Miami Dolphins. Dolphins have been struggling recent weeks, obviously, 2 straight losses. And then Buffalo have been winning, but have not been operating at the same offensive efficiency or putting up the crazy numbers as they have. As I'm sure you saw, there's that little clip of the reporter, based not really asking. It's like they're kind of just telling Josh Allen, like, oh, this offense isn't, at a Super Bowl level or whatever. And then he's just like, okay, like it wasn't really a question. So I don't know. Like I don't blame him for the way he reacted. But anyhow, John, big game for these two, probably decides the division and maybe Miami's playoff chances. What are your thoughts on what will occur here?
Well, I just think that after the last time they played, Buffalo might be a little bit more motivated, right? You play in Miami. The weather was on Miami's side in that game, and things did not go super well for Buffalo, despite the fact that in terms of actual offensive output, Buffalo over doubled everything that Miami did. And I just think that Buffalo was the better team last time. They just couldn't get it done in the red zone. And I think although, the weather and all that stuff that's going to be going on, this is Buffalo's home field. Like, this is what they play in. This is what they're used to. I'm going with the Buffalo Bills here. I know the spread feels big, but I'm going to do it. I think that Miami, I know Mike McDaniel has actually started to joke around about the fact that people are talking about the cold story and the heaters last week. He was wearing a shirt apparently today in practice saying, I can't remember what it was, but something along the lines of like, I hope it gets colder in here. And so clearly they're already taking it with stride. But that said, they just play in polar opposite environments. Last time, like I said, Miami had the heat on their side. This time Buffalo's going to have the cold. And I think that after the last 2 weeks of what we've seen other teams do defensively against Miami's offense, I think McDermott's been taking notes, and I think that we're going to see that press coverage, whether it's man or zone on the back of it. I don't think it necessarily matters that much. It's just the press, which forces Tua to hold the ball a little bit longer and not being afraid of the speed of Tyreek and Waddle and trusting your pass rush to get there while your secondary is jamming them at the line. And I think that Buffalo is the defense that can do that. We've seen, even without Von Miller, we've seen guys like Gregory Rousseau step up last week and get a lot of pressure on the quarterback. And so I'm going to take Buffalo here because I think their defense is going to be the difference maker, and I think the weather is going to play a pretty big part.
Yeah, I want to emphasize on the weather too. One of the knocks I had on Tua coming out was, okay, when it gets into these poor weather games, I just don't think he has the arm power to rifle the ball into places that he wants to put it. Like we've seen the elites, Josh Allen, even Tom Brady, Aaron Rodgers, Mahomes. Like, it doesn't matter the weather, they can still throw the spiral. They can still sling the rock because they throw the spiral so well. It doesn't matter if there's wind for the most part. It doesn't affect their accuracy. Whereas Tua, we've seen, and I think you mentioned too, like the throwing power seems to be lesser and lesser recently, and obviously his accuracy has been, has fallen victim to that too, and also the fact that the thing that you definitely mentioned too was that the press and all this stuff. It's just kind of a bad mix for Miami. On top of like I just said, the weather. On top of that, they're not a great running football team either. So that's one of the few weaknesses of the Bills defense is they've kind of been run on at certain points of this season, but that's not a strength of Miami. They couldn't run the ball against the Chargers. I don't think they'll be able to run the ball successfully against the Bills. And yeah, you mentioned last time too, they almost doubled Miami's yardage. And that's another thing. Miami's defense is still a little too over-aggressive in my mind, just leaving too many one-on-one opportunities across the board. And we saw last week, Herbert, even if they weren't open right away, bought a little time with his legs, made some plays. We all know Josh Allen is great at doing that. So, yeah, I am going with the Bills also to cover. And, yeah, we'll see if Miami... if they can, obviously, how they'll be affected. If the shirt's BS, or if they really will be affected once they're actually in the game itself on Saturday. I almost said Sunday, on Saturday evening too, and it's evening, so it probably means it's more likely to snow. I don't know. I'm not from the north, but just generally speaking, it's colder in the evenings. I wouldn't be shocked if it's even worse then. So those are the Saturday games. Now we go to the games on Sunday, starting with, which is unfortunately a critical NFC South playoff game, even though both these teams are sub 500. And I don't think many people outside of the regions want these teams in the playoffs, but they could get in there. It's going to be the New Orleans Saints at home, favored by 4.5, hosting the Atlanta Falcons. A little of the underlying storyline is this is going to be Desmond Ritter's first start. They named him the starter right before the bye week, so we got the bye week hopefully to get more time to prepare. So, John, who are you rolling with here? The Falcons and Desmond Ridder or the New Orleans Saints?
I'm taking the Falcons and Desmond Ridder. I have no evaluation of this game. But that's because this division feels impossible to evaluate. Like, it's just so close. None of the teams are that great. I don't know. I think I'm taking the Falcons because I've seen them cover a lot of games this year. I know, Desmond Ridder, he's a rookie. He's got a lot of things that, might not be there yet, but I don't think there's really that much of a drop off, if any, from Marcus Mariota, because Mariota wasn't doing that much for them anyway. I have a coworker who's a Falcons fan, and he was saying that the move doesn't make total sense because he didn't feel like Mariota was the reason they weren't winning, or they were losing. But I've countered that with, well, he definitely wasn't the reason they were winning, and it didn't feel like he was necessarily doing anything special to really help this team. Like he was playing quarterback, but there wasn't any spark that he was providing. And so I can't imagine that Desmond Ridder is going to be much worse unless he just has like a complete disaster class. But the Saints just dealing with injuries, I don't know. I'm just still concerned about the fact that their commitment to Andy Dalton, because he has so many up and down games. I'm riding with the Falcons. I don't feel good about this game. So if I was a real life bettor, I wouldn't touch this one. But luckily, we're not even putting money on this. So I'm taking the Falcons.
I am taking the Saints. I think it's just a tough first game to be thrown into at New Orleans against a pretty creative defense. And no Kyle Pitts. So it's really just Drake London as your main difference maker. Although, Cordarrelle, he can always be count on for a player or two, or Cordero, excuse me. And on the flip side, Saints offense is always scary to rely on because we've mentioned before, 1 week Andy Dalton has a clean game, and then the next week throws 2 picks, like we saw in Atlanta, 2 pick sixes and game over, and they're not explosive enough offense to make up for those mistakes. Like they can't afford that. And really, though, neither can Atlanta. So New Orleans won the first matchup. I'm just kind of counting on the fact that there's some continuity with them. I just, once again, I don't know what we're going to see at Desmond Ridder. It's hard to tell what improvements he's made to his game. And, obviously how much better of an upgrade he'll be over Mariota, at least initially. So as for now, I'm going with New Orleans. Maybe they're more desperate since, they should have won that Monday nighter against the Bucs. And if they did, they definitely would be in a better position playoff-wise. Nonetheless, they're still in that hunt. And, hey, maybe they can salvage their season by making a good push here at the end. So I'm going with the Saints to cover. John is going with the Falcons. It's scary, though, yeah. I'm just thinking in my head, too. I just realized it's a lot of points for Atlanta in terms of Atlanta because they always find a way to make these games close. So now we go over to the Windy City of Chicago, where the Philadelphia Eagles, they are favored by 9.5 points, visiting the Bears. Bears fresh off their bye week. Eagles put that beat down on the Giants. How do you see this one playing out, John?
Well, I mean, Philly, obviously a really, really good team, and 9.5 doesn't feel super unrealistic, but Chicago's at home, and so I think that there's a little bit of an aspect of that, but also I think that Philly's run defense has not impressed me a ton this year, and Justin Fields is just an entirely different animal when it comes to the way you have to defend the run. I don't know the status of Khalil Herbert, but I'm assuming he might be getting close to returning. Whether it's this week or in a few weeks, regardless, I still think that Chicago is going to have success on the run game with David Montgomery and Fields. And although I don't think they're going to win because I don't think their defense is good enough to slow down Philly whatsoever, I think this could be like that Miami game that Chicago played in earlier, where Miami was able to do whatever they wanted offensively, but Justin Fields just sort of, willed the Bears to make it at least close. So I'm going to take the Bears to cover. I mean, 9.5, once again, it's a big point spread. And when you got a dynamic runner like Fields who seems like every week bust off a big 60-yard rushing touchdown, that kind of stuff can just give you some easy points to at least keep it closer than maybe it appears to be. So I'm taking Chicago.
Okay. I'm also taking Chicago. By the way, not looking like Khalil Herbert will be back for this week's game. He still has to be taken off IR, but it's looking like next week is when they're targeting. So likely then. But nonetheless, I'm going Chicago. Basically, it's 10 points, and that's a lot. You mentioned the Bears. This offense has kind of found a spark recently, and although I think the Bears defense will be definitely losing the battle against Philly's offense. We've seen, the Bears defense is not very good in Philly. They're kind of on a hot streak right now, although who knows, the weather could play a factor. So, they may be forced to more of the short run game, and that could negatively affect them. I still think the Eagles will find ways to win this game, but yeah, 10 points is a lot for the Bears, and especially off a bye week, they're probably trying to get Chase Claypool more and more involved, and we have seen a little bit of emergence of Cole Kmet be involved recently, and you mentioned too, obviously Justin Fields has been literally carrying the load more as well. It'd be interesting to see how Philly's run defense lives up to this, option run offense that we've seen work pretty well against most, quite a few defenses. So it's not like it's a fluke or anything. So it'll be a good challenge for the Eagles. But yeah, I expect the Bears to keep it close, and we'll see too if it's supposed to be sub like in the 20s that game, and it's Chicago. So like I said, weather could play effect into this one and could help out the Bears. So we'll see if Chicago can cover for John and myself. Now we go over to New York, where the Jets are at home. They are favored by 1.5, hosting the Detroit Lions. We mentioned pretty much recently, Lions have been on a pretty good hot streak as of late. Looks like it's going to be Mike White as a starter for this game, although Zach Wilson is actually active. He's the backup, apparently, so who knows if we'll see him. Nonetheless, though, John, who are you going with here between the Jets and Lions?
I'm getting a little risky with this one because I do worry about Jared Goff on the road in December, but I'm going to take the Detroit Lions. I don't know. I just kind of got this feeling that their offense is going to keep getting better and better as the season comes to a close. I think their offensive line is going to be able to deal with the Jets' defensive line, especially since, at least as of right now, Quinnen Williams is questionable. I don't know if it keeps him out, but he's dealing with something, and so I don't know. I just feel like that Detroit Lions offensive line, they can do their thing. I think we could see more of Jameson Williams this week. I think that Amon-Ra St. Brown presents a very unique challenge that they can't just like throw Sauce Gardner on him, because Amon-Ra moves around. He's in the slot. He's on both sides. He's just one of those route runners who's real fast. Just not someone that like a corner like Sauce is going to shadow by any means. So I don't know. I'm rocking with the Detroit Lions. I also think that the Jets, they have the pieces to pick apart this Detroit defense, but I worry that the run game is going to have a tough day because the Lions quietly over like the last month or so have had one of the better run defenses in the league. I mean, even last week, Dalvin Cook really didn't do anything. And when you're using Zonovan Knight, who's your, third, fourth string option, I just don't think the Jets are going to have that much success in terms of running the ball. And so I don't know. Overall, I'm rocking with the Lions because I think they can control the line of scrimmage on both sides.
So I'm going with the Jets here. You mentioned Jared Goff, poor weather. That's main factor for me. And then on the flip side, although Detroit's defense has been better recent weeks, this Jet offense, even with my criticism of Mike White, which is more just realism, we've seen they still had success. They've still been able to move the ball. For them, it's just been an issue of punching it in the end zone. I imagine that they'll come up with some creative ways to get the ball in the end zone, some creative plays, concepts, because they have lost 2 straight. It's a little bit of desperation in terms of, hey, like we would like to make the playoffs, and probably, hey, like we really need to make sure this Mike White thing works, or else who knows the can of worms we're going to be opening if we have to, go back to Zach Wilson and, that whole ordeal. So, yeah, I just think that they'll be a little bit more motivated at home. And, still in the playoff hunt, Miami, because they've lost recently, it's helped them out, keep them alive in that race. And especially with teams like the Chargers kind of coming up in the hunt right behind them. I expect Rob Saleh to have his team on their P's and Q's. Also, be ready for some trick plays. I don't think we mentioned it last pod, but yeah, definitely be ready for like a. Why am I blanking on their tackle? They made that offensive play to the tackle last game. Penei Sewell. I don't know why I want to say Holly Pulivati Vaitai, but Penei Sewell. He had that trick play, obviously, but I don't think that the Jets will be caught off guard or anything like that. I'm sure they'll be ready, and I think they'll win this one and cover, obviously, at home. So another disagreement for John and myself there. And now we go over to Carolina, where the Panthers are at home, and they are favored against the Pittsburgh Steelers by 3.5. Gonna check. I'm not sure if there's a status on Kenny Pickett. It's loading right now. He's still questionable, obviously dealing with concussion and the new concussion stuff. So who knows if he'll be ready for Sunday. But if not, might be Mitch Trubisky instead. Who are you going with here, John?
Regardless of Mitch Trubisky or Kenny Pickett, I'm going to rock with Pittsburgh. My tried and true strategy of taking the Steelers when they're the underdogs. Also Carolina. I know they're at home. I know they're coming off a win, but Pittsburgh's just going to create a sort of unique challenge in terms of I don't think they're going to be they're not going to be able to be as reliant on the run game as they were last week against Seattle. Also, they got some young tackles in Carolina, and TJ Watt. I know a lot of people haven't really been talking about him since he came back, but he's still TJ Watt. And so I think that he could be a key difference maker here. And I don't know. I feel like Pittsburgh, when they're the underdog, they tend to come through. They tend to keep things close, and it works for me more often than not. So I'm going to keep riding it.
Yeah, I'm also rolling Pittsburgh. You mentioned the young tackles. Also, Sam Darnold, remember, he was seeing ghosts when he was the Jets. I feel like he might be seeing some against Pittsburgh, because Pittsburgh throws a lot of creative blitzes and concepts at you. And, yeah, I just think Sam Darnold's head's going to be swimming there. And on the flip side, even if it is Mitch Trubisky, I'm sure, especially after last week, drilling his head, hey, just be smarter in these situations. And like I said, for the most part, he kind of moved the ball. It wasn't terrible, on offense. He just had to clean up the mistakes. So, I think Pittsburgh will do enough, definitely to cover, but I expect them to win also. So we both believe in Pittsburgh and in Mike Tomlin. Now we go to your game, John. The Dallas Cowboys, they are favored by 4.5 going to Jacksonville. Jacksonville coming off a couple of good performances recently, and Dallas beating the Houston Texans by a little bit less than some people expected, but they've been on a pretty good heater as recently too. Who are you going with here? Your Cowboys or the Jaguars?
I'm going to go with the Jaguars. The line feels a little bit big for me. We saw last week that Dallas struggled to cover. It required a last-second touchdown. I feel like Dallas has kind of been overly aggressive recently early in the game, specifically Dak and some of the decision-making that he's made. And I think that if they do that again, Jacksonville's just been looking really good this week, and so they could get out to recent weeks, and so they could get out to an early lead. Also, the Cowboys, although their defense is hyped up and all this kind of stuff, they're allowing about 110 rushing yards a game, which for a whole team isn't like terrible. It's not like the worst run defense in the league, but it's still something notable. Travis Etienne has had some tough situations recently, like last week against the Titans, where he got absolutely nothing. And I think that some people might overreact a little bit to that, but I think this could be a bit of a bounce back week for him. He's an explosive runner. He can make big plays happen. And also Dallas just has some injuries that aren't really being talked about. They just lost their right tackle, Terrence Steele, for the season with a torn ACL. They have two of their starting corners, which Jordan Lewis, he's been out for quite a while now, but Anthony Brown, I believe, is going to be out for the rest of the year as well. So just a lot of injuries that are happening that aren't getting a ton of attention that could, be exposed here. Like we could see, I think Trayvon Walker's questionable, but he had a monster week last week. I think he was the highest graded defensive end in the league, according to PFF last week. And so he could have some success here against Jason Peters, potentially on the right side. We could see Zay Jones, who's been having a really big showing the last handful, I think 2 or 3 weeks. We could see him have success on the right side against Kelvin Joseph, who hasn't been super impressive on the outside. So I don't know. I just think there's routes for Jacksonville to at least keep this close. And I'm also, I don't know. I just feel like there's a possibility that they could win as well, just with the way that Trevor Lawrence has been playing. So I'm going to rock with the Jaguars to at least cover the spread.
Yeah, I'm rocking Jacksonville also for the main reason you hit on. I mean, Trevor Lawrence has been on fire recently. Seems to be finding his way with his offense. And, main thing with Dallas is just kind of avoid the turnovers. I feel like, very turnover-driven defense, momentum kind of defense. Nothing wrong with that. But, as of recently, Jacksonville's been doing a really good job at taking care of the ball and offense. And we mentioned it last podcast, too, and you just mentioned it now. Over aggression, especially on Dallas's side on offense. We've seen that, especially from Dak, a few interceptions where you didn't really need to force that, Dak, or, in the play calling as well is always scary, especially at Jacksonville. We mentioned Jacksonville's always a weird place. I feel like, especially there's a couple times a year that Jacksonville catches a team in their lulling asleep per se, or off to a slow start. It was Buffalo last year. Obviously, Jacksonville's a better team this year too. So I just feel like that could easily happen here. Regardless, just two really good teams. So I'm going Jacksonville, taking the points. I won't be shocked if they pull off the upset, but we'll have to see if they can do that. Nonetheless, John and I both agree on Jacksonville to at least cover. Now we go over to Kansas City, where the Chiefs are favored by 14.5, and they're going to Houston to play the Texans. So basically, do you think Kansas City will cover, or do you think Houston will keep it within 14 points?
Short and sweet. I'm not trusting Houston against Kansas City. I'm not doing it. I know that Kansas, if you look at fantasy apps, I thought this was funny because one of my people in my fantasy leagues brought this up. He thought it was interesting that for Patrick Mahomes in the matchup stat, it says that the Houston Texans are the second toughest matchup for opposing quarterbacks, only second to Philadelphia. That stat is a little bit flawed because teams just tend to run the ball on them a lot. And I think as we saw at the end of the game last week against Dallas, Dak was able to do whatever he wanted on that final drive when it came to just throwing throughout the drive. And I can't imagine that Kansas City is going to struggle to throw the ball, despite what this second toughest matchup thing says. And also, I think Isaiah Pacheco could have plenty of success here, too. Jerick McKinnon's been having a lot of good games. So I think Kansas City's going to roll. Also, a lot of injuries on Houston's side. Dameon Pierce had an ankle sprain. He could be out for quite some time. I think the high ankle sprain is usually about 3 weeks. Still no word on if Brandon Cooks or Nico Collins are going to be back. Derek Stingley has been missing time. Just a lot of key players that are dealing with injuries. So I'm not touching Houston. I'm rocking with Kansas City, despite how big the spread is. If Houston backdoor covers, so be it. I will fall on that sword.
Yeah, I'm not going to add anything else. I have agreement. I'm going Kansas City. Basically, I just want to pose the question to people. What do you think is going to happen? Do you think more likely to happen? Kansas City blows them out of the water, or it's kind of close? I think we both are at least leaning towards blowing them out of the water. So no offense, Houston fans, but yeah, you're 1-13-1 for a reason. Anyhow, now we move over to Denver, where the Broncos are at home. They are favored by 3.5, hosting the Arizona Cardinals. Cardinals, no Kyler Murray. He has been out for the rest of the year with a torn ACL. I'm trying to see Russell Wilson's status. I don't see him on the ESPN injury report. So is it safe to say he's going to play? I don't know. I'll make sure to double check that. So it looks like he's might play. Who are you going with here between the Broncos and Cardinals, John?
Maybe there's just some internal bias because of what the Arizona offense did to me last week, but I just don't trust them right now. And I don't trust Denver either. But Arizona burned me specifically in losing me that playoff spot in fantasy. Denver's at home. Their defense has been playing well. If Russell Wilson does play, Jerry Jeudy had quite a bit of success last week. I know it was against Kansas City, so sometimes their defense isn't the greatest. And you are playing against Arizona, who also not one of the greatest defenses, but I would say they're probably a little bit better than Kansas City when you got guys like Budda Baker in the back in the secondary. But overall, I don't know. I just don't trust Arizona. They're going to rock with a backup quarterback. Their run game has been inefficient. I'm not sure what the game plan is going to be with DeAndre Hopkins because they might have Surtain shadow him, and Surtain has just been going crazy. I'm not touching Arizona. I'm going to go with Denver. I don't have a ton of great analysis outside of that because both these teams don't instill a ton of confidence in me. But just at least the one thing that does instill confidence in me is last week with Sutton being injured, they moved Jerry Jeudy outside as opposed to normally being in the slot. He said he liked it because he got a lot more one-on-one matchups, and we saw that it had success. So maybe that happens again this week. I'm not sure. But I would hope that, the Denver coaching staff, if they see anything that could have that kind of success that allows Russell Wilson to have his best game of the year, that they would do it again. Maybe that's wishful thinking. I don't know, but I'm going with Denver.
All right. Well, I'm going with Arizona. It's a very tough matchup to pick from because I like obviously both defenses pretty good, but both teams maybe having the backups because Russell Wilson, at least as of today, Wednesday, did not practice due to his concussion. So we could see Brett Ripien, Colt McCoy, Colt McCoy is also questionable show. I'm actually going to go, and that's one of the reasons why I'm going with Arizona. If it is Colt McCoy, I trust him a little bit more than Brett Ripien. And New England was a very tough defense to go up against. And besides that, kind of random fumble by DeAndre Hopkins and obviously getting sacked a bunch of times. It was a close game between them, and they kind of moved the ball at certain points. And yeah, basically, I just trust Colt McCoy a little bit more than I trust Brett Ripien and also his stable of weapons. Even if Hopkins is taken out, we've seen Hollywood Brown, if he doesn't drop the ball, contribute. Robbie Anderson had a little bit of a showing last week, and Connor, he's been solid for them as well. Although, like you mentioned, a little inefficient, but I mean, yeah, that's the whole thing for Arizona. But especially, Cliff, I imagine his job may be on the line, so maybe he tries to get a little more creative. Although, Nathaniel Hackett's job is also theoretically on the line too here. But I just think, regardless, Arizona will keep it close, may even win this one. So I'm happy to have the points. So another difference for John and myself. Now, speaking of New England, we go to their game where the Patriots are favored by 0.5 point at the Las Vegas Raiders. It's a little old Bill Belichick disciple versus Belichick here with Josh McDaniels against Belichick. John, basically, with 0.5 point, we're picking who's we think will win. So who do you think wins between these two?
I am going with the Las Vegas Raiders. I saw in practice this week, they got Hunter Renfrow and Darren Waller back. I don't know if they're both going to play, but they've at least started practicing. I don't know. I trust Josh Jacobs. I trust Devontae Adams. I trust Derek Carr. I know that they haven't had a ton of offensive success in some of these games recently, specifically in the second half. And that does worry me when you're going up against Bill Belichick, especially considering the state of this Raiders offensive line. But I also don't really trust this Patriots offense, and I worry that if Ramondre Stevenson doesn't play, that they might be even slower. Regardless, I think this is a close game, and my gut feeling is telling me the Raiders. My gut could be terribly wrong, and my brain is saying to go Patriots because this is McDaniels versus Belichick. But I don't know. I kind of feel like Devontae Adams might have a big game or something like that. So I'm going to take the Raiders. This is probably the one pick that I have this week that I do not feel confident in whatsoever, but I'm doing it. I'm definitely not going to lock the Raiders, though. Spoiler alert, because after the burns that I've received recently, I don't know why I'm going back to them, but I am.
All right, well, I'm going with New England. I think their defense, I just kind of applauded them in regards to their performance against Arizona, although I know it was against Colt McCoy. Still talented Arizona team, and we've seen other performances from this New England defense be really good. And I just think although Waller and Renfro coming back is a little scary, I think they'll pose some problems on that end. Definitely take away Josh Jacobs in the run game. They've been a very good run defense. And on the flip side, I know it has been pretty for New England. There's been a lot of talk that's kind of grown, and rightfully so, about the relationship between Patricia and Mac Jones. Obviously we saw on Monday night, Mac Jones was not happy for a lot of the night, and they were struggling at times. And, they've still been trying to get guys like Marcus Jones, a cornerback, the ball as their best playmaker. So that's concerning. But like you mentioned, not a lot of difference makers on Las Vegas's defense. And I think even if Ramondre Stevenson, is dealing with an injury, is out this game, we saw last game, New England able to run the ball pretty efficiently. And then I expect, especially after all the frustration and stuff, to be a little bit more, the passing game to have a little more clarity. Maybe Mac Jones isn't as frustrated this game, and they do a few more things maybe that he likes or he wants to do. And I just don't foresee Las Vegas being able to create many stops that way. On the flip side, we have seen the Raiders be great on offense for a quarter or two and then get shut down. And then, oh my gosh, they blew the lead because their offense, got shut down, and then their defense can get a stop. So, yeah, I'm going with New England. I just have a little more faith in them as opposed to the Raiders. So we'll see if the Raiders can finally come through for you, although they have, before, but obviously you need it now as the season closes. Now we go to the LA Chargers, fresh off that big Sunday night win. They are at LA at home. Everyone says LA is not really a home field advantage. They are favored by 3.5, hosting the Tennessee Titans. Titans just got torn apart by the Jags and have had a couple of tough losses here as of recently. How do you see this one shaking out, John?
Well, this game is really interesting stylistically because I think both teams counter each other perfectly. The Chargers, their weakness is their run defense, and the Titans are going to want to run the ball a lot. And the Titans, their weakness is their pass defense, and the Chargers are going to want to pass the ball a lot. Ultimately, I'm going to go with the Chargers here because I'm just betting on Justin Herbert, Mike Williams, and Keenan Allen to score more than Derrick Henry. That basically is my entire philosophy here. I think that the ability to pass the ball is going to be more valuable than Derrick Henry's ability to run the ball. I think both are going to have success. I think this could be a shootout, but ultimately I think that if the Chargers can ensure that they're scoring early and often, at some point they could force Ryan Tannehill in this offense to start passing the ball because they're playing from behind. And I worry that that's the time in which the Chargers are going to, take advantage of that, maybe get an interception, something along those lines, a big play, a sack fumble, something like that. So I'm going to ride with the Chargers here in this game.
All right. Well, I'm going with Tennessee. I just think, especially after the performance last week, I expect a better performance in terms of secondary. And we've mentioned Chargers. I mean, that's a lot of short to intermediate stuff, and I think they'll have a better answer, the Titans will, for stopping the 12 catches for Keenan Allen and limiting Austin Eckler. And then also even the Mike Williams 50-50 balls, which are still tough to stop because most of the time Herbert literally puts it where either Mike can get it or no one can get it. And they have a great connection that way. But also on the flip side, another reason I'm going Tennessee is we know they're going to lean on Derrick Henry. And we have seen, I know, like I said, Miami wasn't able to take advantage, but we've seen other teams run over the Chargers, literally just have their way in regards to the run game. And that's what I fear, is that Tennessee will be able to get, at least a couple of key stops and then, eat clock, and then on offense, convert their drives into scores. And then Chargers already kind of one-dimensional. Their run game isn't great anyway. That I just think that Tennessee will pose some issues for them. And regardless, 3 points is I think Tennessee, I think Tennessee might win this game. So I'll take the 3 points here. So another disagreement for John and myself. Now we go to the final afternoon game for Sunday, and that is the Bengals. They are favored by 3.5 going to Tampa Bay. Tampa Bay just coming off that tough loss against the Niners, and Cincinnati's been rolling recently. So who are you going with here, John?
Well, I'm changing my pick live. I was going to take Tampa, but I'm actually going to go with Cincinnati here. The reason I'm changing was, I don't know, I felt like maybe Tampa would be in a spot for a bounce back, but I worry about their ability to stop Jamar Chase. Their secondary has been rough recently. We just saw Brock Purdy was able to have success against that secondary. Joe Burrow is going to shred them. So I'm going to take Cincinnati. Like I said, I didn't have a ton of great analysis as to why I was initially taking Tampa, but I am changing that pick to the Cincinnati Bengals to win and cover.
All right, well, I'm going with the Bengals also, so we are in agreement. We've seen this Bengal defense have kind of be the unsung hero. They've been doing a really good job, and this Tampa Bay offense just been struggling recently. It just hasn't been the same. I wanted to dare say since last year. They're not running the ball as efficiently, and I know they've been dealing with injuries, so that could very well be that is a factor. And on the flip side, you mentioned Tampa Bay defense dealing with some injuries on their own in the secondary, and they just kind of been torn apart recently. So, I'm going with the Bengals. They've been able to protect Joe Burrow better, and Joe Burrow's still really slippery in the pocket. They got the run game going too recently, and that's, I think, been a big help to that, to preventing those defensive linemen just teeing off at Joe Burrow. And then obviously having Jamar Chase makes any team scared to send blitzes and such. So we both go with Cincinnati to cover over Tampa Bay. Now we go to the Sunday night game. It's a division matchup within your division, John, the NFC East, and that is the Washington Commanders. They are at home, favored by 4.5, hosting the New York Giants. Last time these two teams tied. So how do you think this one shakes out, John?
I'm taking the Giants. I took them last time, I think, and they covered because of the tie. They were the underdogs as well. In this division, I think that Washington's probably the better team, but I don't necessarily think that they're so much better that they can separate, especially by, what was the spread, 4.5? Like, if they win by a field goal, I can see that. I don't know. Both these teams, I just feel like their scoring potential is limited, so I'm going to take the Giants.
All right, well, I'm going with Washington. I think we literally had the same, like you mentioned, you picked the Giants last time. I picked Washington this time, so I think it's ironic. We're Groundhog Day, we're right back where we started. But I think Washington will learn from the mistakes last time, and last time they played, I think Washington had some turnovers, kind of got behind the 8 ball early, and then found their way back. And then also Washington had a bye week last week in between the game 2 weeks ago, while the Giants had to play the Eagles. They got beaten pretty badly. It's just, and Saquon's health, his neck, going to that game with the neck injury, I don't imagine it got better, although maybe it gets better throughout this week. But we've seen just outside of Saquon and even Daniel Jones in the run game, there's nothing really else for the New York Giants on offense that scares you. And then on the flip side, we know that playmakers on Washington, sometimes just a matter of getting those guys going. Brian Robinson's been running the ball really well recently. They've gotten the run game going. And then we know that Terry McLaurin, Curtis Samuel, and even Dotson's kind of had a little bit of revival late in the season as well. Their rookie, John Dotson. So I'm going with Washington. I think they take care of business here, while the Giants slowly kind of slipping back to the expectations that we expected of them. But nonetheless, the way they started the season is still very encouraging, and there's nothing to be ashamed of going forward. But who knows? Maybe they'll have a resurgence as well under Brian Daboll. We know he can fire them up over there in New York. So now we go to the Monday night game, which is my game. The Green Bay Packers at Lambeau at home, favored by 7.5, hosting Baker Mayfield and the LA Rams. LA Rams kind of getting that mini bye with Baker off that win on Thursday night. And my Packers literally coming off a bye week here. How do you see this one shaking out, John, between these two?
Another game that I'm actually going to change my pick live. I'm going to go with the Green Bay Packers. I was initially going to go with the Rams, but then I actually realized the Packers are at home, and I don't know. The weather, I think, is another factor here. We're getting late in the year. It's December. Things are just going to start getting cold. The Rams are a team that they play in a dome in California. So I don't know. I think Green Bay, they could have success running the ball here. Assuming Aaron Donald is still not going to be playing. I don't know if he's been officially shut down for the season or not, but I assume he doesn't play because there's really no point for him to play. And so I think that A.J. Dillon, Aaron Jones, they could have some success here. They're coming off a bye week. And so I don't know. I just think that this is one of those situations, and we'll get into it a little bit later, but the Packers are not eliminated from the playoffs. And I think that they're acutely aware of that. And they know that if they are going to have a chance to potentially make it to the wild card spot, this is a game they can't drop because they have tougher opponents ahead. So I'm going to take the Packers.
Yeah, I'm also taking Green Bay. Last time Baker played the Packers at Lambeau, threw 4 interceptions. Obviously, he was with the Browns. But we got to definitely say, especially in regards to right now, definitely more talented team that he had previously in the Browns than he does right now, especially on offense and with the LA Rams. And remember they were struggling to score, like even move the ball until those last 2 drives against the Raiders. And I think Packers defense is definitely better than the Raiders, equipped with the weather too. And you're gonna probably have to run the ball a little bit more especially if it starts snowing, just any sort of inclement weather. And we already know the LA Rams is not a great run team right now. And on the flip side, yeah, you mentioned it. Who knows if Aaron Donald probably won't play. Packer run game's been getting going recently. The offensive line started to gel as Bakhtiari's been consistently playing and getting back into form, and Elton Jenkins as well. And then that helps when those two are at their best positions and at their best, and the other guys kind of just fill in. And then Rodgers has been playing well on top of that, and obviously him and Christian Watson have been making plays. And then we still have Lazard who's solid and such. So yeah, I just think it'll be a lot. And you mentioned the playoff implications. I think basically from here on out, like for Green Bay, like if you do want to make a playoffs, it's a playoff game from here on out. You have to win out while you still kind of control your destiny. I mean, if we lose, then it's purely out of our hands, even if we go 3-1 probably. So yeah, I just think the desperation will be there, and especially just having this wave of momentum in terms of the recent success on offense too. And I'm hoping the bye week didn't kill that momentum, because that can happen. We've seen that with the Bills. We've seen that with a couple teams where the bye week is sometimes not a great things in terms of momentum. Teams come stumbling out of it. So hopefully that doesn't occur for my Packers. But yeah, we both believe that they will cover, and obviously it helps being at Lambeau on probably expectedly a snowy night. So we both go Green Bay there. So we both have 7 differences for this week. Like I mentioned, I'm 4 games ahead of John, and last week I was 1 game behind him. So a swing can easily happen either way for either of us. But anyhow, it is time to do our locks of the week. It is an odd week, so the table is yours, John, if you want to go ahead with your first pick.
Well, last week I tried to take less to, potentially get more points, because I still have 0. The Raiders failed me, so I will not be taking the Raiders again. But to start, I am going to take another Thursday night game, taking the Niners. Took a Thursday night game last week. Didn't work out for me, but I'm doing it again.
All right. Well, I'm fairly. This is, it's just gonna bite me in the butt. I'm fairly confident in my Packers. I'm taking them as a lock. I'm probably very likely going to regret this. I think the last time, I think when I did win, I locked against them. I'll have to check, but for now, I'm making them a lock this week.
Cool. This is tough. A lot of these are tough. I'm going to take the Chargers. Feel confident. Justin Herbert with his weapons back.
Okay.
I don't know. I feel confident.
I did not, by the way. I did not, when I won, it was not with the Packers.
Okay.
When I locked. All right. Well, I'm actually going to take the flip side, John. I'm taking Tennessee.
Okay.
So that's one of the rare instances where we're literally the one game decides. So now could potentially decide.
Yeah, only one of us can get our locks this week, which is really interesting. I mean, there's also a scenario that neither of us get it, but
yeah,
impossible for both of us to get it. Okay, that's interesting. I'm going to take one more. I will take the Pittsburgh Steelers.
Okay.
Mike Tomlin, don't fail me.
All right, I think I'm going to sit there. I really want to pull the trigger on Kansas City, but 14's a lot. And I just don't trust Minnesota enough. Who knows? You know what I mean? It could be one of those games where Indy shows up, Jonathan Taylor breaks a big run, and then that's always scary. So, or Bears, they still got playmakers. So, yeah, I'm going to keep it at 2. And John will obviously have 3. John's 3 are San Francisco. So they have to win over Seattle by 4+. Pittsburgh, if they either win or lose by 3 or less, that's a win for John. John covers. And then Chargers have to win by 4 or more against the Titans. My locks are, I have the Titans. So Titans, if they lose by 3 or less or win, that's good for me. And then my Packers have to win by 8 or more on Monday night. So But very much so, it looks like that game, that Chargers-Titans game, will decide that for the both of us. So those are our locks for the week. John has 3, I have 2. I have technically a 3-game lead, although it was all in 1 week. And we'll see if John can catch up there and in regards to the spread picks. But those are our picks against the spread for week 15 of the NFL season and our locks. Now you wanted to talk playoff scenarios out loud, correct?
Yeah. So obviously we're getting towards the end of the season. We've got this week and then 3 more weeks after this. So 4 total weeks left in the season.
16, 17, 18. Yeah. And the 15. 15 is 4.
So we got 4 weeks left, including this week. And as of right now, there's still a lot of teams in the race, at least in terms of teams that are sort of on the bubble. In the NFC, Tampa, obviously, they could potentially lose a division title. Washington and New York are both in wildcard spots, not fully locked in yet. And then we got Seattle, Detroit, Green Bay, Carolina, Atlanta. We're not going to talk about all those teams because some of those aren't very interesting. But there's some are. And so in the NFC, we're going to start with the Seattle Seahawks because they are in a bit of a dogfight for a potential playoff spot with Washington, New York, Detroit, Green Bay. So Seattle, just to cover the remaining of their schedule, it's tough. They got the Niners tomorrow. They got the Chiefs next week, the Jets the week after, and the Rams after that. Obviously, we haven't covered some of these other teams yet, but do you feel like with that schedule, there's a possibility they make the playoffs? Just for clarification, too, right now they are 7-6. Both Washington and New York are 7-5-1, and they do play each other this week, so one of them could get bounced out. But how do you feel about Seattle? Do you think with that schedule, it's even possible they could make the playoffs?
I really hate to doubt Seattle again because we doubted them at the end of the year and they proved us wrong. But now that the season's played out and I feel like we have a better feel for them, obviously, we have respect for them and I wouldn't be shocked to make the playoffs, but I just don't see it. Niners this week is really tough. And then you play the Chiefs and Chiefs are still playing for something at Kansas City. Jets are never an easy out. And then Rams, okay, that might be where they win one. But even then, who knows? I just think the next 3 are tough, and I'm just not confident that they'll get enough wins. I could easily see them going 2-2 or 1-3 down the stretch here. I unfortunately do not believe that Seattle will be able to make it. I don't think it's very likely in that regarding their scenario.
Yeah, I agree. Honestly, out of every bubble team that we're going to talk about, this is the one that I feel least likely can make it. And it's not even an indication of how talented Seattle is. It's just that schedule. San Francisco, especially on a short week, this isn't, San Francisco and you got a whole week to prepare. You got to go play a tough divisional opponent and could have pretty big implications for the rest of your season because then you got to go, like you said, Kansas City at Kansas City. That feels impossible to win. It's not impossible, but it feels impossible. And so now if you lose back-to-back games, you got to go to the Jets, who are also fighting for a playoff spot. If you lose all 3, you're not going to make the playoffs. It's not going to happen because at that point, the best you can do is 8-9. So I don't think Seattle's going to make the playoffs either. But there's still a chance. You never know. If they can upset San Francisco here, things can get crazy. If they can win one of those games of San Francisco and Kansas City, the Jets could be a toss-up. The Rams, they should win. It's the last game of the year, so you never know. The next NFC team I want to talk about, and this kind of goes hand in hand, is the Detroit Lions and the Green Bay Packers. So both in similar situations, sitting at Detroit is sitting at 6-7, Green Bay is sitting at 5-8, but they do play each other the last game of the season. Let's talk about Detroit first. Not as tough of a schedule, not even close as tough a schedule to Seattle. This week they play the Jets, which is tough, but then they play the Panthers, the Bears, and then finish it off the Green Bay Packers. How do you feel about the Lions' playoff chances?
Obviously, I feel better about them than the Seahawks. What does scare me is three of those last 4 on the road. Jets are a really tough one, obviously, this week, and we've seen the Panthers. They're also playing for something too. I could see them making it. I give them a better chance than the Seahawks. I'm interested I don't know if you know, but if it comes down to that last game, like I say, Detroit wins 3, and say Green Bay has won all theirs going up to that point, is that last game deciding? Because it's Green Bay's technically a game behind them in the standings. But for example, Green Bay wins that last game, though, they would be tied in division and conference in theory and then I guess that goes to, I don't know where the tiebreaker goes from there.
I think if they tie, I think the Lions, like if Green Bay was to beat Detroit and they would have an actual tie, I believe the Lions would make it, because I think it goes to common opponents in your division. And at least so far, the Lions have beaten the Vikings once and lost to them once, and they've beaten the Bears once. So in this hypothetical scenario, they've beaten the Bears again. That means that, well, actually, what has Green Bay done? Because they lost to the Vikings once, and they've already beaten the Bears twice, right? Yeah, they've beaten the Bears twice, I think.
Bears twice.
So, okay, then I actually don't know what would happen. Maybe it goes to common opponents in the conference.
I have no clue.
But in that case, I think maybe Green Bay would have it, because they beat the Cowboys and Detroit lost to Dallas. They both lost to Philly. Did y'all play Seattle this year?
We have not played Seattle.
Okay. What about the Panthers? Did y'all play the Panthers?
I don't think so. I'll have to double check.
Okay, then it looks like if it's common. Wait, did y'all play the Giants? Y'all played y'all lost to the Giants.
No, we lost to the Giants.
They beat the Giants.
And they beat the Giants.
But y'all beat the Cowboys, and they lost to the Cowboys. So then I don't know. I don't know all the NFL tiebreakers.
I don't know either. Like, because then do you go to AFC?
Did y'all play Washington?
AFC common opponents? We lost to Washington.
They beat Washington. So then I think maybe it goes to Detroit.
They might probably have the advantage there.
So yeah, I don't know. The tiebreakers get real complicated there. I might even have it wrong on the order. I don't know if common divisional opponents is the next one, but regardless, yeah. So the Lions could have a potential good case. I would say there's a realistic chance they could make it, but the problem is they don't have the fate in their own hands, because they are, like you said, they got to play the Green Bay Packers, and that could decide some things. And then they're also still behind Washington. They're behind the Giants. They got to contend with Seattle. Even Carolina, like Carolina's 5-8. There's a possibility they could potentially make it in as a wild card team if they were to win out. So yeah, it could be tough for the Lions. But let's talk about the Packers now. Packers, a little bit tougher of a schedule than Detroit. Y'all play the Rams this week, play the Dolphins the week after, then the Vikings, then the Lions. And we just sort of already just explored the tiebreaker scenarios. But how do you feel about your Green Bay Packers' potential to possibly make the playoffs?
I feel so in regards to making the playoffs, not very confident, just because, like we just mentioned, a lot has to happen. Detroit probably has to drop a game, and we just talked their schedule, probably not likely. On top of the fact that the Washington and the Giants, we lost them in the season, so we definitely lost the head-to-head tiebreaker, and they're still ahead of us, so we have to have things happen there. In regards to maybe winning out and at least giving ourselves a shot, I mean, the only game that really scares me, that I'm really concerned about, would be that Miami game on Christmas, just because, Miami's very good, and who knows how we'll be able to handle, Tyreek and Jalen Waddle. And obviously Minnesota does scare me too. Like, those are the two games that are obviously like big on my, and obviously you have to win Detroit at the end, but I feel a little more confident against Detroit, at Lambeau at the end of the year. So I'm not scared about that one. So I would say, we talked about Detroit and Seattle. As much as I love my Packers, I think if I had to put gun to my head, had to put money on it, I would say Detroit would be my, out of the three, most favorite to go in, then Green Bay, then Seattle. It's a very close 1-2.
Yeah.
But mainly because of the two tough opponents is why I put the Packers lower.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think really the indicator of Green Bay's motivation, I think, is going to be that Miami game. If they can win that Miami game, anything's kind of possible from that point. Because then I think even like assuming they beat the Rams as well, if they beat the Rams and then Miami,
yes,
the Packers are riding a 3-game win streak. And they did have their bye week recently, so they're a little bit more rested up, and that could put even more pressure on Detroit too. Like, they can't drop one, because if they do, that could lose the tiebreakers and things could get dicey. So if Green Bay wins Miami, then I would say if they beat Miami, they instantly become my favorite out of those three NFC teams to make a playoff spot, because if they're beating Miami, I feel confident they could, y'all could beat Minnesota. And then if y'all have won those 3 straight games, well, I guess technically 4 straight games at that point, I would expect y'all to beat Detroit in Lambeau on the final game of the year for a potential playoff spot. Like Aaron Rodgers in that kind of environment, I'm not betting against him.
I mean, it's happened way too many times. I mean, the year he broke his collarbone against the Bears back when Jay Cutler was the quarterback. So, yeah, I wouldn't be. But yes, I would say yes. The Miami game is key. Also, granted that we win. Yeah. This is all granting that we take care of business on Monday, because that could easily very well not happen.
Right. And I mean, even if Detroit was to drop one of these games, that could incentivize this team even more, because that would give them a tiebreaker opportunity. Okay, that's the NFC teams that I want to talk about. Speaking of the Miami Dolphins, though, they have lost 2 straight games. They have a tough game here against the Bills. So although they are sitting at 8-6, it's not a guarantee that they make the playoffs here. 8-5.
8-5.
It's not a guarantee they make the playoffs here. It would be unlikely that they miss it, but I want to talk about it nonetheless because of their schedule. They got the Bills this week, and we've already talked about how that's probably a tough game. And we just talked about it. They got your Packers, who are very motivated. Then 2 more teams who are currently in the playoff spots, the New England Patriots and the New York Jets. How do you feel about Miami? Just in terms of math, I think they have to win 2 of these games, and they should make it, because that'll get them to 10 wins. But how do you feel about their potential to make the playoffs?
I think they can I think they can go 2-2. I'm fairly confident. Obviously, I think the big games, all these games are big. We already did the picks. I foresee Buffalo handling business at Buffalo, against Green Bay the 2 games at Miami. I think are the ones they're more likely to win, against Green Bay on Christmas, and then 2 weeks later against the Jets at Miami. And obviously, we'll see if maybe they won't be if they take care of business against the Bills, and Mike McDaniels prove that the cold's not a factor, because then that would give me more confidence for them against the Patriots. Although that's still scary because it's the Patriots and they barely hung on week 1 against them. But because they are have kind of afford to lose a drop or game or 2, I think that they'll make it at the end of the day. It's just too talented of a squad, and I feel like they know they got a lot riding on this in regards to management making all the moves they made, and obviously Tua. I'm sure he knows that this is obviously a big year and a big stretch of weeks to get them at least into the playoffs. To justify his draft pick and such. So I think they'll make it. I think they'll hang on.
I agree for the most part, because like I said, they got to win 2 games here. I think we just said it for the Packers, but I think that's a very crucial game for them too, because if things go as expected and they do lose to Buffalo, that means they've lost 3 straight games. So they got to get their act together, because if they lose 4 straight against Green Bay, then the tough part is they're playing
to New England.
You're going to New England. And the tough part too is for that wild card spot, at least as right now, they're the 6th seed. Right below them is the Patriots, 7-6. Then the Chargers, 7-6. Then the Jets, 7-6. The Chargers already hold the tiebreaker advantage over them because they just beat them. So if they lose to the Patriots, I don't know about tiebreakers there. We're not going to go through all that. If they lose to the Jets, either of those games, things could just get really dicey. Yeah. So they need to win that game against the Packers. If they drop that, they have to win back-to-back games. If they drop 3 of these 4 games, I don't think they make the playoffs, because I don't think they're going to hold a tiebreaker over the Chargers. They're definitely not going to get into that 5th seed range unless they can win, probably 3 of them, because you're contending with Cincinnati or Baltimore, who both have 9 wins already. So, I think for Miami, they should make it in, but it is a tough road, very tough road, because the AFC is pretty competitive. Okay, now I want to move on real quick to the Chargers. This one feels pretty cut and dry just based on their schedule, but as of right now, they're sitting at 7-6. They're on the bubble. If the playoffs started today, they would not be in. So we do need to talk about it. But this week, they play the Titans, then they play the Colts on a Monday night game, then they play the Rams, and finally the Broncos. This is probably the easiest schedule of any team we've talked about so far, because only one of these teams is a playoff team, which is the Titans this week. So how do you feel about the Chargers' ability to potentially sneak into the playoffs? And this could hold some, weight, at least for the Dolphins and some of those other teams we just talked about.
I think the Chargers could. I mean, if they need to win 3 games to get in, if they can go 3-1, I think that they could. Everyone, once again, I made the pick. I don't think that they'll win against the Titans, but the Colts, I think they can win that one, although it's still a little bit of a scary matchup at Colts. Rams, I'm pretty sure so as well. And then at the Broncos, we've seen it's kind of a mess for the Broncos. And they beat the Broncos before anyway, although at Denver is always scary. In terms of like, so we talked about if they can go 2-2, how confident I am that they could go 2-2. In regards to comparing that to if the Chargers can take care of business, go 3-1. I'm more confident in the Chargers, like you mentioned, because of those last 3 games going 3-1. And who knows, they could even beat Tennessee, and then once again, they're right in the driver's seat. And especially with how season of last year, desperation is not really new to them. So I think, they won't, in theory, they're less likely to fold under this pressure of, okay, we got to win these games to get in the playoffs, because that's what they had to do last year. And yeah, they failed, but now they know what failure feels like. So I don't know. I feel like there'd be extra motivation.
Yeah, I feel the same. Honestly, I think out of all the teams we talked about so far, this is the one team that has the most likely chance to sweep the rest of their schedule. This Titans game's the tough one, but even in the Titans game, they're the favorite. They should be the favorite in all 4 of these games. And so I think there's a potential realistic chance they could. And like you said, they still have leeway. If they drop 1, that's okay. If they drop 2, that gets a little dicey, but they could make it depending on what other teams have going on. So I just think that because of that tiebreaker over the Dolphins, I don't know if they played the Patriots or the Jets this year. They have not, it looks like.
They have, okay, so according to ESPN, it says they have a wins tiebreaker over the Jets based on conference, but they do not have it over the Patriots. That's why the Patriots, I guess, are in.
Okay, so then
a 7th seed over them.
So they have basically over those teams that are fighting right there, they have the tiebreaker over both the Dolphins and the Jets. So I think that like I said, if things get dicey, that bodes well for them. So I think they should make it, assuming that they can handle their business. And then the final one that I want to talk about is interesting because one of these teams could be a wild card team, but more realistically, this is why I want to talk about these 2 teams together. This division race is not over, and that is the Jacksonville Jaguars and the Tennessee Titans, something that we didn't necessarily think would be happening, but the Titans just lost to Jacksonville. They are now 7-6. Jacksonville is 5-8. Those records don't feel super close, but they do play each other again on the final game of the year. And to end the season, they have quite similar schedules. So for the Jaguars, and both of them have very tough games this week. The Jaguars play my Cowboys, but then they play the Jets. But then they play the Texans, and they finalize it with a rematch against the Titans. And then the Titans, they play the Chargers. Then they also play the Texans. Then they play my Cowboys as well. And then they play the Jaguars too. So just based on these schedules for both teams, I mean, the Jaguars would need to win 3 of these most likely, and they would need the Titans to drop some of these. I'm assuming both teams are going to beat Houston. So I'm kind of chalking that up to a win for both teams, which would put Tennessee at 8 wins, which once again means Jacksonville has to win 3. But because they play each other, that kind of potentially goes well in their favor. But how do you feel about this potential division race?
I think Tennessee will still handle their business and win the division. Like I said, I foresee them beating the Chargers this week. And even if they do, they still play Texans. We kind of chalk it up as a win. And as good as your Cowboys are, we've seen they can kind of be run on, and that's the Texans' strength. So that would be an interesting matchup. Although, once again, and Dallas, and we mentioned Dak's kind of been over aggressive, turn the ball over a bit, which favors the Titans. And then, who even knows how the last matchup will go? Like, even if the Titans were to screw the pooch, so to say, and then, the last game's a decider against the Jags. Although they lost this time, like it took a Trevor Lawrence kind of a Herculean performance, and I would imagine by then they have a healthy Traylon Burks. I could foresee Tennessee, winning that one. But like I said, because I think they're going to beat the Texans and the Chargers, I think that itself would be enough to get them in the playoffs in regards to winning their division. But what about you?
Yeah, I think Tennessee should get in, but the games that I think are really going to be the key indicators here are, number one, this week against the Chargers. If they beat the Chargers, it's really unlikely that Jacksonville can pass them because then they have the Texans game. So that's going to be tough. But if they lose to the Chargers, things open up the door. And then if hypothetically the Titans do lose to the Chargers, the And regardless of what happens in the Jaguars-Cowboys game, the Jaguars-Jets game would be incredibly important, and the Titans-Cowboys game would be incredibly important, because if my Cowboys could beat the Titans, that really opens the door for Jacksonville if they had beaten the Jets at that point. Because once again, I'm assuming both teams will have beaten the Texans, and then they would have that matchup in the final week of the season, which part of me is hoping that scenario happens, where it's like a win and get in scenario for either team in that game, because that would just be really awesome. It'd feel like a playoff game. But yeah, I think the tough part is that the Titans have this 2-game lead already. So if they win any of these kind of games, like against the Chargers, against my Cowboys, or even if they just beat Jacksonville outright at the end of the year, the Jaguars kind of lose any of their hope for winning the division. There's still a possibility that they could make the playoffs if the Jaguars were able to sweep and the Titans still somehow won the division by beating the Chargers, the Cowboys, as well as the Texans. That's still possible, but unlikely, because at 5-8, they got to sweep, win all 4, and they would need some help from some of these other teams like the Patriots, Dolphins, Chargers, Jets to kind of have a just disaster class to end the season. So unlikely the Jaguars make the playoffs, but still interesting nonetheless. So anyway, those are the playoff scenarios that I wanted to cover, just because I do think things are getting kind of interesting down the stretch here.
All right, so yes, we'll probably definitely talk more of those as time goes down here. But nonetheless, those were our thoughts on some fringe teams in their playoff scenarios. And obviously, we'll have to see how this week goes, and we'll probably talk more about that next week, because there'll definitely be maybe some of these teams eliminated, or some of their chances may look better. And obviously, injuries and such factor in, so that may provide different outlooks. But nonetheless, that will do it for John and myself. As always, like I mentioned at the beginning, you can always find us on our YouTube, Shut Up and Ball. And we also have a Facebook page that's just, Shut Up and Ball. Same with our podcast. It's on all free podcast mediums, or most of them. And we are on social media at Shut Up and Ball Pod on Instagram, and at Shut Up and Ball on Twitter and TikTok. Other than that, we will see you all next week after the conclusion of these games to go over them and such. And yeah, everyone, enjoy your weekend, and we'll see you next week.